Hey everybody, and welcome to Dominion Cards. This is a video series where we take a strategic, in-depth look at various cards from the board game Dominion. Today we're looking at Moat. Moat is a 2-cost action and reaction card from the base game. It has an on-play effect, which is plus 2 cards, and then it has an additional effect that says, when another player plays an attack card, you may first reveal this from your hand to be unaffected by it. So what do I mean by this separation between on-play effect and another effect? So anytime you see this dividing line in the middle of a card, the bit above the line is what happens when you actually play the card as an attack, and the bit below the line usually implies some other effect that happens at a certain time. So in this case, this is letting you know that you can react to this card when another player plays an attack. So that's an important distinction that will matter for some cards, the difference between on-play effects and not. So just so you are aware of what that is. It's also worth noting with this card that when you reveal it from your hand, it actually goes back into your hand, so it will allow you to be unaffected by an essentially unlimited number of attacks as long as it is in your hand. So let's take a look at Moat as a regular action card first of all. So it's a terminal and it gives you plus 2 cards. So this is much, much worse than something like Smithy, which is a terminal that gives you plus 3 cards. Very substantially worse, even though it's just 1 less card. So when you use terminal draw, you need villages to support that usually. You need quite a lot more villages to support Moat if you're going to be using it as your primary source of draw than you would if you need something like Smithy. The plus 1 card really matters in this case. It's also a lot harder to find the cards that you want at the right time because you are drawing less cards. So if you think that you need a village and a Moat, like alternating, in order to draw your deck with Moat, only looking at the next 2 cards instead of the next 3 cards, it's actually quite a lot harder to find what you want. So Moat is a lot less reliable as draw, it's a lot less powerful, and you need quite good trashing to get any reasonable chance of drawing all the way through with it, because if you still have a load of estates and coppers, your turn, it's so likely to just die. So it's pretty poor as draw. Terminal draw specifically. In addition to that, because you need so many more villages to support Moat over something else, it looks like it's only a 2-cost card, but there's actually quite a lot more expense that goes into it because you need more villages. So for every Moat, you may think you're making a saving over something like Smithy, but if you need another village to support that, it's a lot more expensive in terms of buys and sometimes more expensive in terms of pure cost as well, depending on how expensive the village is. So Moat's pretty weak as a terminal draw, unfortunately. Now, Moat isn't just terminal draw, it's doing something else as well, and that is that Moat is a defense card. So it will block all attacks that come your way as long as it's in your hand between your turns. Unfortunately, this means that if you consider that most of the time you only have a 5-card hand between turns, one of those 5 cards will now be used up with a pretty weak terminal draw card, and that could actually potentially hurt how good your next turn is going to be. So if you consider if you didn't have the Moat at all, it could be that your hand would have had something better in it instead of a Moat, and that could have been the difference between drawing your deck and dudding out your hand. In addition to that, if you are just drawing Moat blind inside a deck, you're starting with a set of 5 new cards and you don't know what they're going to be, you have pretty low odds if you don't have that many Moats of actually starting with it in your hand. The Moat is only going to give you the block if it is in your hand. If you've got 1 Moat somewhere in your deck and it's not in your starting hand, it's not going to do any defense for you at all. So, unless you get a lot of Moats, you find that on many turns you just aren't going to get any defense at all, and Moat just isn't going to work as a defense card. So Moat, for that reason, is the weakest defense card that is available in Dominion, and it's also pretty weak overall. It's not very good for its on-play effect, and honestly, it's not always that good for its defense effect either. You generally don't buy Moat just because you want defense a lot of the time. It will take up room in your deck. It's a terminal card, and if you're not going to play it, then it's essentially a completely useless stop card. I mean, yeah, occasionally it'll block defense, but if it's not, then you've just got to draw past it every time you want to draw your deck if you weren't going to play it. So because it's just such a weak terminal, that means that you can't really just add it into decks willy-nilly. You've got to actually support it. And because it's not doing much for you in terms of playing it as a regular action card, as an action card when it's in your deck, it's just not that great a lot of the time. Honestly, you've really got to make it. You've got to work hard to try and make it work in your deck. So why do we bother with defense cards? Well, defense as a concept and nullifying attacks, it's a lot more valuable as you add more players. So if you think about a card like Witch, if it's in 2-player, you might get a Witch played against you on a turn, but if you're playing 4-player, you could get up to 3 Witches played against you on one turn. With attacks in general, whether they're stackable or not, the more players there are, the more opponents you have, just the more opportunities you're going to get attacked on a turn. So Moat is way more likely to have a good effect when it does defend if you have more opponents, just because you're just more likely to get hit by multiple attacks on a turn. So it does a lot more for you on the turns where you do get the defense. Now in 2-player, Moat, because it's so weak and because it's hard to defend with it, a lot of the time you just simply ignore it. An important part of Dominion is that attacks do not always have any defense available. Right? Just because there is attack does not mean there's going to be a defense card like Moat to deal with that. And so you have to learn how to deal with getting attacked every turn. How do you build your deck facing an onslaught of certain attacks? And once you learn how to do that, you realise that Moat isn't even necessarily going to do that much for you. Because Moat is so weak, just spending the turn buying a Moat and the opportunity cost versus just getting something that's better for you is often pretty harsh, right? Like buying a Moat is almost like performing an opportunity cost attack on yourself, right? You've added a card, you've intentionally made your deck slightly worse just in order to buy the Moat that a lot of the time isn't really going to be doing anything for you. Like that's not a good decision to make. So what about, for example, Junker attacks? They seem like it would be nice to not get curses into your deck, and that's true. Junker attacks are a nice thing for Moat, but one of the best things to do with Junker attacks is try and get all of the junk into your opponent's deck first. So that means that if it costs 5, the Junker, like Witch, you really want to focus on getting that Witch first before you do anything else. So you would probably delay getting the Moat for something better, and then by the time it might feel time to start getting a Moat, you've already gotten rid of most of the junk, so you just never pick one up, and you just want to focus on winning that cursing split. For a discard attack like Militia, if you think about you had Moat in your hand and you got hit by a Militia, you would probably find that the Moat would be one of the cards that would get discarded anyway, because it's pretty weak. So sure, instead of going down to a 3-card hand, you get to keep your 5-card hand. But if one of those cards is Moat, and you just never able to play it because it's not very good, then you sort of only had a 4-card hand anyway, because one of them was completely useless, the cards that you had. So it's not necessarily doing very much for you in cases like that. So in 2-player, defense as a concept in general is sometimes not as good as it might seem, so you can just ignore it anyway, and Moat is a pretty bad defense card as it turns out anyway, so it's got a lot against it. So that's enough about why Moat is terrible. When is Moat actually good? So sometimes, Moat, it's still a draw card. Sometimes you just need to draw, right? Draw cards are still draw cards at the end of the day. If you have something that you can do by drawing your deck every turn that's really strong, you will get Moat. And it doesn't matter if there are no attacks. You just want a draw card. So you will pick up Moat anyway. So that's sort of using Moat solely for its on-play effect. The challenge of Moat being drawn into your starting hand can sometimes be mitigated. So if you have a way to consistently end your turn by putting a card back on top of your deck, then you can use Moat, and then you only need 1 Moat, and you can basically consistently have it in your starting hand every single turn. So that could be quite nice. So I've got some examples here. Artisan from the base game. If you play Artisan as the last action on your turn, you can gain a 5-cost card, and then you can just put a Mote from your hand back on top of your deck. So in this case, you would never ever play the Mote, but you would just make sure that it would be on top of your deck every turn. And that does mean that you are essentially having a 4-card hand every turn, but sometimes that's a lot better than being hit by, like, for example, Militia, where you would only have a 3-card hand, or some sort of junking attack. So, or a trashing attack even. So, I've played games where you can make that work, and that can be quite good for Moat. Scheme is an example that is from, I want to say it's Hinterlands expansion. I can't quite remember. I think it is. It allows you to actually play the Moat on your turn, and then at the end of the turn you can put it back on top of your deck. So, there the Moat is actually a bit more useful for you. Of course, you are putting the Moat back instead of something that would be even better for you, so there is still an opportunity cost there, but you are getting the consistent defense. Lastly, here is an example, an event from Adventures. So every turn you get to, at the cost of 1 coin, you get to put some card from your hand to set it aside, and then it actually joins your next hand once you've drawn up at the end of this turn as a 6th card instead of 5. So in this case, at the cost of 1 coin per turn, which is not very much, you get to put a Moat in your starting hand while also keeping 5 other cards in your hand. So that can be quite nice. Again, there's an opportunity cost. You're using Moat instead of saving something else, but if the attacks are nasty enough, then that can be just, you would rather have the defense. So there are more examples, but these were just examples of some slightly different ones. Another thing is that if the attacks are really, really bad, so sometimes cards like Knights can be just terrible against certain decks, you can consider getting more Moats over other forms of draw and just accept that you're going to be drawing slightly worse because you just want a bunch of Moats to get good coverage, and it's still a draw card. Right now, whether or not that's worth, like, not taking a good 5-cost plus 3 cards instead, it's going to depend a lot on what's going on the board and what attacks there are, so I can't really give good examples here, but just something to keep in mind. Sometimes, actually, the defense is a good bonus. Also, it can be useful because it's quite cheap. Sometimes you can buy it very easily, and it can just be nice as a little bonus when you already have a lot of spare action space. So Festival Library decks are decks that draw somewhat slightly inconsistently, but they have a whole bunch of spare actions because they've got a load of festivals. So you can just, if you've got a spare 2, you can throw a Moat into that, and on some turns you will just be able to draw just a little bit better and help find those libraries a bit more easily. So that can be just nice grease, but you don't want too many of them, just 1 or 2. Lastly, although I've said this, because it's so cheap, it's quite easy to add them. Sometimes when you're building your deck, the next card you want to add in needs to be draw. You just need more terminal draw at that point, and if you've only got a little bit of money, Moat can be better. Like, maybe you've got 5 and 2 buys and you think, well, instead of getting 1 terminal plus 3 cards, I could get a village and a plus 2 terminal instead. Sometimes that will be the right option, but bear in mind, just because Moat is cheap doesn't mean that you can actually throw a load of them into your deck and it will be okay. So you just got to watch out, but think about that carefully. So overall, Moat is a very, very weak card. It's surprisingly, it's not actually the worst card in the base set, but it's generally quite poor. One unusual special case that I want to talk about right now. It's very obscure, but it can happen. Sometimes you can get attacked while it's actually your turn. So Black Cat is the only obvious example of this. If you can draw your entire deck, then when you come to buy a province at the end of your turn, you can have a single Moat in your deck and actually make sure it's in your hand. So when your opponent then goes and plays a load of Black Cats, you don't get any curses because you were able to find that Moat because you've already drawn your deck that turn. There are some very, very obscure ways that you can otherwise be attacked during your turn. It's not really worth going into them because it basically never happens. But just bear in mind that Moat can still work against Black Cat, and it can actually be very effective. But this is just a special, unusual case that just happens to be all right for Moat. Now what we're going to do is we are going to go to the online client, and we are going to just generate some boards with Moat, and we're going to see how useful it really is for us. So what's going on here? Well, for start, the only attack is Bureaucrat. We haven't done the video on Bureaucrat yet, but boy is it bad, so we don't really care that there is Bureaucrat on this board. Moat is actually the only draw here, the only effective draw. Is there any trashing? There is only remodel, so you kind of can't really build an engine here. Now, that's not true. You can remodel coppers into moats, and you've got like a workshop to gain villages after that, but like it's going to take a long, long time for you to actually build up your deck. And when you do, what are you going to use for money? Well, there is vassal, but it's still slightly inconsistent. You've only got one village pile, and if you need quite a lot of moats and villages, and the trashing is really slow. So I actually think the engine is not really worth building here. I think you definitely want a remodel. You can turn the estates into like poachers, and then you're just kind of going to go money. Whether or not you even bother to buy the mine, I'm not sure, because I just don't think you're really drawing very much here. I think you're going to open remodel like silver probably over vassal. You're going to get some poachers, and you're just going to go money, and you're just going to buy provinces one at a time. I think that's all you do. I think it's not really viable to do anything else because this board is so weak. So I think Moat, you could buy it on a 2. If you're going money-ish, you can do Moat money, even though that's really poor. But I think the engine is just no good here. It's too slow. It does lose to just a sort of, I want to say remodel money, even though that sounds completely terrible. I think it still does lose to something like that. So yeah, poachers, remodel, maybe a Moat or 2 just as draw, but you're really not happy about it. If your opponent goes to the engine, you might be able to do it as well, but I think you just beat them with money, sadly. Very, very weak board there. And that's why Moat kind of got a look in, because the rest of the board was so weak. Here we have incredibly good trashing with Chapel and Sentry. There is no village, so you are never going to play Moat. There is no... Oh, that's not true. There is Bandit as an attack. You still want to trash everything. Do you even bother with the Artisan, or do you just Bandit? I think what you do is you Chapel Sentry, just to get clean really quick. You get a Bandit, you fill it with golds, and then maybe you get like one smithy or something at some point, and you can use that to just draw, and you sort of stop playing bandits. And you're just going to look to buy one province per turn. I don't think playing bandit, getting a whole load of golds, and then playing council room is good. Maybe council room is better than smithy, actually. Maybe you don't care that you draw your opponent one card, because... maybe that helps you win tiebreakers. Maybe the extra buy might get you a duchy on one turn, and that's all you need. So, but you definitely don't want Moat here. Like, Moat's really bad here. There's 2 other draw cards that are better, and there's no village. And you don't really care about the attack. Bandits attack, even though you've got a high proportion of golds. Just let them trash your golds. It's not worth adding the Moat to your deck, honestly. Just make your deck worse. So, no for Moat there. So here we have a powerful attack in form of Witch. Now there's no village. That means that what we actually want to do, there's no trashing except mine either. So this is just Witch money. So what you do is you get a Witch, you get a second Witch, you're going to open with... Do you bother with Poacher? I guess you do. I guess you'd go Silver Poacher. Like, it's fine if eventually Poacher discards one curse, whatever. You just want to win the curse split. You don't really want to go Moat. If you get a 5-2, would you go Witch Moat? I'd probably just go Witch nothing, honestly, on a 5-2. But you really want to get to Witch. You want to give all the curses, and then at that point, if you ever wanted to buy another draw card, it would be Smithy. You could probably... Would you even bother to mine? I don't think so. I think you can't draw your deck very quickly because there's no engine here. There's no village. So it's just witch money, sadly. Maybe Artisan can pick up some duchies for you. That would be better as another terminal, actually, getting some duchies with Artisan. So, yep, sad board. Really powerful attack that dominates it to the point that you actually don't want Moat because you would rather just get a start on the junking. Now, if that were 3 or 4 player, I might consider them Moat. But in 2 player, just probably not, honestly. We do have a village this time. We got Chapel for trashing. We got a village. We got a moat. We got a workshop. So we can actually gain a village moat engine here using workshop to support. We got Artisan as well. Artisan actually not so good. It looks like we have village, vassal, moat, and a workshop here. Do we eventually get a remodel? Probably just for the end game. But early on, we're going to Chapel. We're going to get a workshop. We're just going to get village, moats, and vassals, and we're going to build up with that. And that's just going to be a little engine. Now, the vassal works just because there are just a high density of action cards. I think village moat is going to be better than village library, honestly. Yeah, it will be. So, because you could just pick them up with the workshop. Is there any plus buy? There is not. So you only want to get up to a province anyway. Maybe you just never even bother. What's the remodel going to do? It might, at the end of the game, turn a village into a duchy for a tiebreaker. Yeah, okay. Maybe you get the opportunity to get that, but you have to get it quite late. Then maybe you just never pick it up. So, okay, Moat is your only draw here. That's why you use it. And it works just because the rest of the board is so weak, except for Chapel, that you just want the draw anyway. Chapel and then building a small engine is a lot better than not chapeling, usually. I think that still beats just big money. And what do we got here? So we've got strong trashing and we got festival library, I spot straight away. And we got Artisan to support festival library. So we go Chapel, we go Chapel silver, like we want to get up to century and just finish trashing. Then we want to get an Artisan and we want to pick up a load of festivals and some libraries. You may pick up a moat if you end up get a spare 2, just because it helps festival library. But that's it. It's mostly just festival library. You probably don't even bother with a bandit. You just want all of your money to come from festival. Is that good enough? It depends on how many festivals you get. Like, you could consider a bandit if you get more festivals. I mean, you've got a seller, right? So maybe seller's better on a spare 2, and it might actually help you support bandit just to do a little bit better in terms of supporting 1 or 2 golds in a festival library deck. If you're planning you can draw everything, you can seller away any early golds and then hope to draw them again towards the end of the turn. So Moat, maybe you pick up one on a spare, but if you ignore it, you don't really care. Moat's really doing very little here. It's just our weak card that might provide some use, but probably won't. And that's it for Moat. As you can see, Moat was pretty bad. Even on the one board that had like a powerful attack, you actually kind of didn't want it anyway. So Moat, yeah, it's just overall, it's a very poor card, very weak. So that's it. Bear in mind, this was mostly 2-player. Like I say, 3 or 4 player, you're much more likely to get it, although you're not necessarily that happy about it. It's just that the certain attacks get a lot worse in 3 or 4 player, that's all. Anyway, that was it for Moat. It's not great. I hope this was useful for you. I will see you next time. Goodbye.